Hey folks, it's Nate, and it's time I got back to the drawing board. Today I want to talk a little bit about something that was in the news over the weekend. Something I saw circulating on Twitter. I saw a lot of comics people talking about how talking about the new business model for Shonen Jump in America, and it's very interesting. They've moved from having a purely subscription-driven service where you would pay a monthly fee and get all of their manga as it became translated, to offering the most recent translations free. So you're going to be able to go to the Viz Media Reader or to the Shonen Jump app, and you will be able to read the latest manga free of charge. Now, if you want to go back and binge on archives or anything like that, you'll need to pay a $2 a month subscription fee. I believe it was $2 a month. But so yeah, but if you pay that, you'll get all the archives of Shonen Jump materials that are available through Viz Publishing. So that sounds like a pretty good deal, if you ask me. You know, if manga is your thing and you want to go back and binge on some of the harder to find stuff from a while back, you'll be able to do that. And it will only cost you $2 a month. So all in all, pretty good. And if you're curious about manga, now you can just go there and read it for free. So that solves the problem of affordability. You know, people can try before they commit any of their hard-earned cash to catching up on a story. So all in all, it seemed like a pretty savvy business move. It's actually kind of surprising coming from a Japanese publisher. They've kind of been resistant to online platforms in the past. So yeah, all in all, pretty interesting. So if you don't know who Shonen Jump is, a little background. Weekly Shonen Jump is actually a magazine, and it's published by a company in Japan, which I believe is Seiyusha. Don't quote me on that pronunciation. I'm sure there's Japanese speakers all over the internet face palming right now. Well, that assumes they actually see this. They may actually be having an Obi-Wan moment. Oh, I'm out of lead. Let me grab another pencil here. So, Shonen Jump is a magazine in Japan, and they are the biggest magazine in Japan for manga and comics. Um, they sold last year, I believe, about 2 million copies of their magazine in the last year. Now it's a weekly, and I believe they take 2 weeks off during the year. So that's 50 volumes total in a year. Each of those volumes comes with about I want to say 10 stories of 20 pages or so each. Don't quote me on these numbers. I'm not a real expert on the Japanese publishing market, but so yeah, they publish a fair number of titles every week. It could be as many as 20. Most of those are serials and ongoing stories. There are always some one shots and I believe they have. I don't know if they have anything equivalent to like mini series or maxi series in Shonen Jump. Again, I'm not a real expert, but the publishing model, from what little I've read and what I know about the industry, is to just start an ongoing and see how long you can keep it going. So, yeah, and Shonen Jump is the biggest best-selling magazine in Japan, but it is just one of many. But they have decided to offer this new approach, free readership and then subscription for archives. A couple of things have struck me about this. And the biggest one is the number of people in Team Comics, the people who are looking to revitalize the American comics industry. A number of people have kind of taken this as a point of inspiration, something that the American comics industry might want to think about. And I think that's probably the wrong call, the wrong reaction here. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that Viz and Sayusha are making a savvy move, because for a long time there has been pirating in the market for Japanese manga. Translators will, they're unofficially known as scanlators, will make scans of Shonen Jump as soon as it comes out, and then quickly translate the Japanese into English so that American fans and other fans around the world can get caught up and stay current with their favorite stories without having to wait for the, especially in the past, very slow work of collecting trade paperbacks and then those trade paperbacks being translated and released by Viz. And even in more recent times, when the digital platform was available and they would translate as fast as they could and release as fast as they could, they were still, I think, typically about a month behind. And now it looks like they're going to try and do simultaneous releases so that the American translations are available as soon as Shonen Jump comes out, and again, available for free, just like these pirated sites were. So it seems almost like Viz and Sayusha were just like, okay, we know there are these people who are going to get it for free. We might as well try and build up our own platforms and get them to use those by offering the latest stuff for free there. And then, we'll try and lure them in with the archives and, the knowledge that they are actually supporting the people who create the stories they love. And you're probably thinking, well, all that's, true of American comics. They don't even have to do the translation work. But American comics don't have... It's different in that American comics are not trying to break into a market while backed by sales from another market. Again, Sayusha they still run a print magazine in Japan, and it still sells millions of copies every year. They have a war chest they can use to back this effort to break into the American market. And I don't know how sales for manga are doing in the US right now, but last I looked a couple of years ago, it was still doing, quite well. It's still a big section in bookstores. In fact, it's a bigger section than American comics published by American companies. So there's that. But this seems like just an attempt to keep attention focused on the publishers' platforms rather than scattered to all these unsanctioned places across the internet, which creep up far too fast for even large publishing houses to deal with, many of which are located on, beyond the reach of U.S. law anyways. So they're just trying to, keep that market share focused in official channels and maybe make a few bucks from those who have the resources and the charity to pay. And this is very different from, American comics. American comics don't do as well overseas as manga does in the U.S. I'm not a real expert on distribution, so I can't back those numbers up, but I know that the French comics market is flooded with high quality comics, and Japan, well, they like American comics, but they there's so much manga in Japan already at a very competitive price point. It doesn't do quite as well as you would hope, and Japan is a smaller market than the US to start with. So it's not like US publishers could back a digital platform with money from another market. It's just not going to happen. In addition, any such platform set up by a US publisher is going to be more expensive to maintain for the simple fact that manga is black and white and American comics come in color. Now, this is a big part of the US comics tradition going all the way back to the early days. Everything was published in color. And, that's fine, but it's more expensive to print. It's more expensive to produce, as most comics pay an entire extra person to do the coloring work. And, in terms of digital hosting, well, color files are exponentially larger than black and white files. So you're facing an additional problem. Well, manga is technically grayscale, but still much larger files in color than in grayscale. So you're looking at a difference in storage and in hosting fees, just because your files are going to be so much larger than the manga files are. And when you look at all of these things together, you have to start wondering about the economic feasibility of this. I suspect that Viz is actually going to be taking a small loss on this service, just to, keep the publicity, keep the attention from being split up by all these bootleggers out there. On top of that, there is another problem with, say, DC setting up a service like this that I think a lot of American fans might not fully appreciate. And I am going to talk about this from the perspective of someone who is not a hardcore comics reader. I usually read trades that I pick up in the store or check out of the library. And when I say pick up in the store, I mean like Borders. I rarely go to your local comic shop. So when I say this, keep in mind this comes from a person who does not read month to month. One of the big perks of signing up for Viz is that you can, this new Viz service is that you can binge the archives very easily. And you can get caught up on your favorite series or all the series from your favorite author that have been in Shonen Jump. But the thing is, Shonen Jump properties are creator-owned, at least to a certain extent, and only the creator of that series works on it. You do not have creative teams swapping in and out constantly on titles in just about any manga published in Japan, unless it's tied into a franchise, something like a Final Fantasy manga or something like that. Usually, stories are written by their author and drawn by a single artist. So usually the same person who writes it. And the result of this is that manga series have incredible creative cohesion. At least the good ones do. There are bad ones that don't, because the author is just trying whatever he can to make something stick. But even mediocre manga have decent cohesion and identity. And if you read like a trade paperback or of say Aquaman or even Batman, and the creative team changes, you notice it is a very sharp contrast. And while people from the way reviewers and other people who follow monthly talk, it's very clear that, really on point people who spend a lot of time thinking about their comics notice these things. I wonder how much the average reader does. I have several friends who read comics, casually. They follow, 2 or 3 titles all the time, and they dip in and out of other series. And they talk a lot about, how, oh yeah, creative teams change, but it's always the same character or whatever. I don't buy it. I've read a lot of stuff in trade, and sometimes it's very obvious that you have competing creative agendas behind these characters. And I think putting an entire archive of DC titles or Marvel titles out for subscription cost would make this weakness of American comics very, very clear. So I think that would actually be a drawback to having a service like this out on the market, when only the really big, famous, defining storylines are available. Things like, your Infinity Gauntlet, your Infinity War, or your Crisis on Infinite Earths, or your Final Crisis, or what have you, are available for a comics franchise. It's much easier to keep people focused and on brand. While if you throw everything online for them to binge, the very erratic nature of the publishing is going to become much clearer. Now, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe that would inspire some people to look into, changing the creative approach that publishers take with their big IPs. But that's not really what I'm getting at here. That's a whole nother can of worms. So, I don't know if you could even convince editorial at DC or Marvel to think about doing something like that, because there are probably people there who are very aware that they need to control what's available in order to keep some kind of creative cohesion for the franchises as they exist now. So that's another reason why I can't really see something like this working in the Eastern market or in the Western market. So yeah, I think that Shonen Jump has made a very savvy move. I think Viz and Seiyusha are gonna profit from this, at least in attention drawn to all of their existing titles. It will make it easier for some of the more obscure, less popular Shonen Jump titles to get eyes on them and gain a following, which will undoubtedly help their sales here in the States. But I don't know as this kind of model would be economically viable, especially given the current size of the U.S. comics market, which is much smaller than the market share that Viz has, to be quite frank. So, yeah, it's interesting, and if the U.S. comics market were healthier, it might be something that they could take more away from. But as things stand right now, I don't know. But it's just the perspective of a casual who's very much outside the industry and looking in. But hey, what do I know? So that's all I got. There's a like button and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.